The Black Death, 1347 to 1351. The deadliest pandemic in history. The Black Death was one of the most catastrophic pandemics in human history, sweeping across Europe, Asia, and North Africa between 1347 and 1351. This devastating outbreak of bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, resulted in the deaths of an estimated 75 to 200 million people, wiping out nearly half of Europe's population. The plague is believed to have originated in Central Asia, spreading through trade routes via fleas that infested rats aboard merchant ships. As the disease reached Europe, it triggered widespread panic, fear, and social collapse. Towns and cities were decimated as people succumbed to the illness within days of showing symptoms. Infected individuals developed painful swellings called buboes, high fevers, vomiting, and blackened skin due to internal bleeding, leading to its ominous name. Physicians were powerless against the disease, relying on ineffective and often superstitious treatments such as bloodletting, burning aromatic herbs, and wearing bird-like plague masks filled with sweet-smelling substances to ward off bad air. The rapid spread of the plague was exacerbated by poor sanitation, overcrowded cities, and a lack of medical knowledge. People fled their homes in desperation, hoping to escape the death that seemed to lurk around every corner. However, this only contributed to the plague's rapid transmission. Entire villages were abandoned, and mass graves were dug to accommodate the overwhelming number of dead bodies. Fear of contagion led to widespread persecution, with Jewish communities being scapegoated and massacred under the false belief that they had poisoned wells. The Black Death not only reshaped Europe's demographic landscape, but also had profound economic, religious, and social consequences. The drastic population decline led to labor shortages, causing wages to rise and feudalism to weaken as serfs demanded better working conditions. The Church, which had been seen as a guiding force, lost credibility as prayers and religious rituals failed to stop the plague. Many turned to extreme religious movements, such as the Flagellants, who roamed from town to town, whipping themselves in penance, believing that God's wrath had brought the disease. In the aftermath of the Black Death, Europe underwent significant transformations. The scarcity of labor led to technological advancements and shifts in agriculture as surviving workers sought better opportunities. The weakening of feudal structures contributed to the rise of a more market-driven economy, eventually paving the way for the Renaissance. Art and literature of the time reflected the deep trauma inflicted by the plague, with macabre themes of death and suffering becoming prevalent. The experience of such widespread mortality fundamentally changed people's outlook on life, fostering a newfound emphasis on humanism and individualism. Though the Black Death was one of the darkest periods in history, its long-term impact helped shape the course of European civilization. The fall of Rome, 5th century, chaos, collapse, and the Dark Ages. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century marked one of the most turbulent and disastrous periods in history. Once the most powerful and advanced civilization in the world, Rome had controlled vast territories spanning Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. However, by the late 4th century, the empire was crumbling under internal corruption, economic decline, military weakness, and relentless barbarian invasions. The final blow came in 476 AD, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, signaling the official end of Rome's dominion in the West. This event plunged Europe into centuries of instability, violence, and societal regression, often referred to as the Dark Ages. The once thriving Roman cities became ghost towns as aqueducts, roads, and public infrastructure fell into disrepair. Trade networks collapsed, literacy declined, and centralized governance was replaced by fragmented, warring kingdoms that struggled to maintain order. One of the primary reasons for Rome's downfall was its weakening military. Once known for its formidable legions, the empire had become reliant on mercenaries, many of whom were Germanic tribes with little loyalty to Rome. As these tribes, including the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns, launched invasions, Rome proved incapable of defending itself. The Visigoths, under King Alaric, sacked Rome in 410 AD, a shocking event that symbolized the empire's vulnerability. Later, in 455 AD, the Vandals plundered the city once again, leaving it in ruins. Meanwhile, the eastern portion of the empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to survive, but the west was beyond recovery. The economy, once driven by trade, agriculture, and taxation, deteriorated due to excessive spending, over-reliance on slave labor, and the debasement of currency, leading to rampant inflation. The once thriving Roman markets vanished as local economies became isolated and self-sufficient, further fragmenting the empire. With Rome's collapse, Europe was thrown into chaos. The absence of a strong, centralized government led to widespread lawlessness, with warlords and petty kings vying for power. Roads, once maintained by Roman engineers, became dangerous, riddled with bandits and crumbling from neglect. Knowledge and education, once valued in Roman society, were largely lost as monasteries became the sole preservers of written works. The population declined as cities were abandoned in favor of rural life, where people could at least grow their own food for survival. Disease and famine were rampant, due to poor sanitation and the breakdown of medical knowledge that had once been advanced under Roman rule. Without Roman administration, Europe saw the rise of feudalism, a rigid social system where local lords controlled land and peasants worked in exchange for protection. While this system provided some stability, it also contributed to stagnation, as innovation and scientific progress took a back seat to mere survival. Religion played a crucial role in shaping post-Roman Europe. With the fall of Rome, the Catholic Church became the dominant unifying force, wielding significant influence over both politics and daily life. Monasteries became centers of learning and preservation, but they also enforced strict religious doctrines that limited intellectual exploration. Superstition flourished, and scientific knowledge was often viewed with suspicion. The fall of Rome is often seen as a defining moment that separated the ancient world from the medieval era. Though the empire's collapse led to immense suffering and the loss of centuries of progress, it also laid the foundation for the nations of modern Europe. Over time, new kingdoms emerged from the ruins, and the gradual revival of trade, culture, and learning eventually led to the Renaissance, marking the beginning of a new chapter in history. The Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, economic ruin and global suffering. The Great Depression was one of the most devastating economic downturns in history, lasting from 1929 to 1939. It began with the stock market crash of October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday, when billions of dollars were wiped out in a matter of hours. This financial collapse led to widespread panic, bank failures, and a dramatic decline in industrial production, triggering a decade-long global economic crisis. Unemployment skyrocketed, with millions of people losing their jobs, homes, and savings. In the United States alone, unemployment peaked at 25%, and in some countries, it was even higher. People who had once enjoyed middle-class comforts found themselves waiting in breadlines, begging for work, or struggling to feed their families. The crisis extended beyond the financial sector, leading to a collapse in consumer spending and a dramatic decrease in agricultural prices, which devastated farmers who were already burdened with debt. The impact of the Great Depression was felt across all levels of society. Those who had invested heavily in the stock market saw their fortunes evaporate overnight. Businesses shut down en masse, unable to sustain operations due to plummeting demand. Banks, overwhelmed by withdrawals and bad loans, collapsed, erasing the savings of countless individuals. As wages fell and job opportunities disappeared, homelessness became rampant, with makeshift shantytowns, known as Hoovervilles, springing up in cities across the United States. These desperate conditions led to a rise in crime, alcoholism, and despair, with many people losing all hope for the future. The economic disaster also had severe psychological effects, as those who had worked hard to achieve success suddenly found themselves destitute. Suicide rates increased dramatically as people struggled to cope with the loss of financial security and dignity. The crisis was not confined to the United States. It spread globally, affecting industrialized nations and agricultural economies alike. In Europe, countries still recovering from the devastation of World War I saw their fragile economies collapse further. Germany, in particular, was hit hard as unemployment soared and social unrest increased, setting the stage for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin used the global economic downturn as an opportunity to consolidate power, pushing forward brutal policies that led to widespread famine and suffering. In Asia, Japan's economic struggles contributed to its expansionist policies, eventually leading to conflict in China and beyond. The economic despair fueled radical political movements as people became desperate for solutions to their suffering. Governments around the world struggled to respond effectively to the crisis. In the United States, President Herbert Hoover's initial reluctance to intervene deepened the crisis, as he insisted that the economy would recover on its own. However, by the time Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in 1933, it was clear that drastic measures were needed. Roosevelt's New Deal programs aimed to provide relief, recovery, and reform, creating jobs through public works projects, stabilizing the banking system, and introducing Social Security for the elderly and unemployed. While these efforts helped alleviate some suffering, full economic recovery did not occur until World War II, when massive government spending on war production revived industries and created millions of jobs. The Great Depression left a lasting impact on economic policies, leading to stronger financial regulations, government intervention in the economy, and the establishment of safety nets to prevent future collapses. It was a period of immense hardship, but it also reshaped the modern world, laying the foundation for the economic structures that would define the 20th century. The year 536, the worst year to be alive. The year 536 is often considered one of the worst times to be alive in human history due to a mysterious and catastrophic global climate event. Historians and scientists believe that a massive volcanic eruption, possibly in Iceland or Central America, threw enormous amounts of ash and debris into the atmosphere, blocking out sunlight for over a year. The result was a dramatic drop in global temperatures, leading to widespread crop failures, famine, and social collapse. Ancient records describe eerie accounts of the sun being dimmed, casting a shadow over the earth for months. Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. Other sources from China, the Middle East, and Europe report bizarre weather patterns, unseasonal snowfall, and devastating food shortages. This prolonged darkness led to one of the coldest decades in history, with summer temperatures dropping by as much as 2.5 degrees Celsius, devastating agricultural production worldwide. The consequences of this climate disaster were catastrophic. In Europe, famine spread as harvests failed, leading to widespread starvation. People who relied on traditional farming cycles found themselves unable to grow food, leading to mass migrations and the collapse of entire communities. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, which had been thriving under Emperor Justinian, suffered immensely as the population struggled to survive under bleak conditions. In China, Historical records describe unprecedented frost in August, destroying crops and leading to severe food shortages. The nomadic Avars, displaced from their homeland due to environmental collapse, began migrating toward Europe, bringing new waves of conflict and instability. Meanwhile, in Central America, the mysterious decline of the great Teotihuacan civilization coincides with this period, suggesting that environmental disasters may have contributed to its downfall. As if the climate disaster wasn't enough, the years following 536 saw additional volcanic eruptions, further compounding the devastation. The situation worsened in 541 when the Justinian plague, one of the earliest recorded pandemics, struck the Byzantine Empire. Believed to be an early form of bubonic plague, it killed an estimated 25 to 50 million people, nearly half of the empire's population. The combination of famine, disease, and climate change led to a near-total societal collapse in many regions. Trade networks disintegrated as merchants and travelers fell victim to hunger or disease, leading to economic stagnation. Cities shrank, and political structures weakened, giving rise to increased barbarian invasions and internal conflicts. The effects of the 536 climate disaster persisted for years, reshaping the course of history. The Byzantine Empire, though it survived, was significantly weakened, altering its ambitions and influence. In Europe, the harsh conditions may have accelerated the decline of the Western Roman world, as struggling kingdoms faced internal strife and external threats. The prolonged famine and societal breakdowns led to shifts in population movements, contributing to the eventual shaping of medieval Europe. Scientists today point to evidence from ice cores and tree rings that confirm the severity of the event, showing massive volcanic activity and subsequent climatic disruptions. The year 536 serves as a stark reminder of how environmental disasters can reshape entire civilizations, bringing about suffering and change on an unprecedented scale. World War II, 1939 to 1945, the most devastating conflict ever. World War II was the deadliest and most widespread conflict in human history, lasting from 1939 to 1945 and engulfing nearly every part of the world. It was a war of unprecedented destruction, involving more than 100 million people from over 30 countries. The war began with Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, prompting Britain and France to declare war on Germany. However, the roots of the conflict went deeper, tied to the unresolved tensions of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, economic instability from the Great Depression, and the aggressive expansionist policies of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Adolf Hitler, driven by the desire to establish a powerful German empire, rapidly conquered much of Europe. In the Pacific, Japan, under Emperor Hirohito and military leaders, sought to expand its dominance over Asia, leading to the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, which brought the United States into the war. The war quickly escalated into a global catastrophe. Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg tactics, combining speed, overwhelming firepower, and coordination between air and ground forces, led to swift victories across Europe. France fell in 1940, and Britain stood alone against the Axis powers. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, initially aligned with Germany, was drawn into the war when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941, an invasion of the USSR that resulted in one of the bloodiest conflicts in history. The war saw brutal battles such as Stalingrad, where millions perished in a prolonged siege that turned the tide against Germany. In the Pacific, Japan's expansion was met with fierce resistance from the United States and its allies. Battles in places like Midway, Guadalcanal, and Iwo Jima saw staggering casualties as both sides fought with relentless determination. The war was not just fought on battlefields, but in cities, where civilians suffered immensely from bombings, starvation, and genocide. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest aspects of World War II, as Nazi Germany systematically exterminated 6 million Jewish people, along with millions of others, including Poles, Romani, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Death camps like Auschwitz became symbols of industrialized mass murder. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, Japan committed widespread atrocities, including the rape of Nanking and the brutal treatment of prisoners of war. The war's industrial scale of killing was facilitated by advancements in military technology, including tanks, aircraft, and later nuclear weapons. The bombing of cities such as London, Dresden, and Tokyo resulted in massive civilian casualties, while the war effort transformed economies and societies, forcing entire populations to contribute to the fight. Women took on roles in factories, medicine, and even combat in some countries, reshaping gender dynamics for generations to come. The war finally ended in 1945, but only after catastrophic destruction. In Europe, Germany surrendered in May following Hitler's suicide in his Berlin bunker. In the Pacific, Japan refused to surrender until the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August, killing hundreds of thousands instantly and many more due to radiation exposure. The sheer scale of devastation left the world in shock. The aftermath of World War II led to a reconfiguration of global power, with the United States and the Soviet Union emerging as superpowers, setting the stage for the Cold War. The formation of the United Nations aimed to prevent future global conflicts, and the horrors of the Holocaust spurred efforts to establish human rights laws. The war caused over 70 million deaths, left entire nations in ruins, and reshaped borders and international relations for decades to come. Its legacy endures as a grim reminder of the cost of unchecked militarism, expansionism, and ideological extremism. The Mongol Invasions, 13th century, the wrath of Genghis Khan. The Mongol invasions of the 13th century stand as one of the most devastating and transformative events in world history. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan and his successors, the Mongol Empire expanded at an unprecedented rate, conquering vast territories across Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. The Mongols were unmatched in military strategy, discipline, and brutality, employing psychological warfare, siege tactics, and swift cavalry assaults to crush entire civilizations. Their conquests resulted in the deaths of an estimated 40 million people, making them one of the deadliest forces ever unleashed upon humanity. Cities were obliterated, populations were massacred, and entire cultures were permanently altered. The Mongols' use of terror as a weapon ensured compliance. Those who resisted faced complete annihilation, while those who surrendered were often absorbed into the growing empire. Genghis Khan, originally named Temujin, united the Mongol tribes in the early 13th century, forging a disciplined and highly mobile army. His forces first turned westward, attacking the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia after a diplomatic insult led to war. The Mongols responded with unparalleled ferocity, razing cities such as Samarkand and Bukhara, killing or enslaving entire populations. Their conquests spread across Central Asia, China, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, where they sacked cities like Kiev and Baghdad. The Mongols employed innovative tactics such as feigned retreats, rapid encirclements, and extensive use of archers on horseback, making them almost unbeatable in open warfare. Their empire eventually became the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the borders of Europe. The invasions left a trail of devastation. The destruction of Baghdad in 1258 by Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, marked the end of the Islamic Golden Age. The Mongols slaughtered an estimated 200,000 to 1 million people in the city, destroying libraries, irrigation systems, and scientific institutions that had flourished under the Abbasid Caliphate. The Mongols also spread terror in Russia, obliterating cities and establishing the so-called Mongol yoke, which subjected Russian territories to their rule for over 2 centuries. In China, the Mongols overthrew the Song dynasty and established the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan, shifting the region's political and cultural landscape. The Mongol invasions were not only violent, but also indirectly responsible for the spread of the Black Death, as trade routes under Mongol control allowed the plague to travel from Central Asia to Europe. Despite the destruction they caused, the Mongols also facilitated a period of cultural exchange and trade. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, allowed merchants, scholars, and travelers such as Marco Polo to move safely across vast territories, fostering connections between East and West. Innovations in communication, administration, and military tactics spread due to Mongol rule. However, their impact on the civilizations they conquered was largely one of devastation, as many never fully recovered from the loss of life and infrastructure. Eventually, the Mongol Empire fragmented due to internal conflicts and overextension, but its legacy of conquest and destruction remains one of the most brutal periods in history. The Mongol invasions reshaped the world map, wiping out powerful dynasties and altering the course of history in multiple regions. Their ability to conquer and destroy at such a vast scale makes their era one of the worst times to be alive for those caught in their path.